Hi, I'm Joel Popadics. I've been an artist at the Maritime Gallery since 2014, and I work primarily in watercolor. I suppose I work in watercolor because of a high school art teacher who introduced me to the medium when I was a freshman. She used to hang her paintings on the walls of the classroom and loved to paint boats and boathouses in Boothbay Harbor, Maine, and I guess that's where I get my love of the marinescape from her as well. I graduated from the School of Visual Arts in New York City with a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, and I worked for one of my professors after I graduated. His name is James McMullen. He's a prominent illustrator and theater poster artist in the city. One of my responsibilities was to cut mats for his paintings. And as I did that, I learned so much about watercolor technique and approach from that experience. Around that time, I was also doing illustration work for magazines and book publishers, and some of my clients included Town and Country, GQ, Parents, and Working Woman magazine. But then the field began to shift more towards computer generated art, and I wanted to continue to paint. It was about that time I made the switch over to fine art, in particular, plein air landscape painting. It was also about this time that I started to teach adults and children at a studio near my home in northern New Jersey. I'm a big advocate of watercolor. I am the vice president and treasurer of the American Watercolor Society and a past president of the New Jersey Watercolor Society. I love to paint harbors and boats, but my work is primarily about light and weather effects, and I particularly love fog. In today's demonstration, I'm going to paint a quiet harbor with some sailboats in the very early morning. I hope you enjoy. I always start my watercolors by wetting the entire sheet of paper. I paint in the lightest parts first. In this case, it's the sky and the sky's reflection in the bay. There's a progression of color from orange to red to blue, and I roll the color around so that it blends evenly. I'm constantly aware of how wet or dry the paper is at any given moment. And when the shine on the paper just begins to disappear, I paint in the passing clouds. There's a small window of opportunity to do this, so we have to work in the clouds before the paper dries. I love how the edges of the clouds soften when I get the timing just right. It conveys a feeling of air in the sky. I make the clouds larger at the top of the paper and progressively slower as they recede into the distance. This way it seems like the sky goes back for miles. While the paper's still wet, I put in some cloud reflections into the water and also suggest some ripples in the bay. I use a hairdryer to completely dry the paper for the next step. Starting with the masts, I begin to paint in the boats. The harbor is relatively calm, so as I paint each boat, I also paint in its reflection. I think of the water as a giant mirror, and that helps me to generate a good shape. I prefer to use a 1/2-inch flat brush to paint the reflections. You'll notice how differently I hold the brush as I paint. Sometimes I just use the corner of the brush. Other times I hold the brush so the hairs are more parallel to the paper. I'm painting a contre-jour effect, which means looking into the direction of the light. I've mixed a bluish-gray color since the boats are mostly in shadow. And I drop bright, rich color for the sails and let all the paint wet blend together for a good lost edge. A rigger or script liner brush has an extremely long hair, and it makes it useful for painting in the boat's masts and rigging. I've organized my boats in a way so that they lead the viewer's eyes into the composition and not outwards towards the edges. A well-designed painting should lead the viewer to a focal point. In this case, it's the sailboat in the lower left. After I've painted in all the boats, it's time to paint the headlands.
I'm simplifying the color and value as I try to carefully paint around the boats and the masts which are in front of them. It's called negative painting, which is not an easy thing to do in watercolor. I employ a dry brush technique where the edge of the land meets the sky. And then finally, I float in some darker shadows in the background. To finish this painting, I might work up a little bit more detail into a few of the boats, including some additional shadow shapes in the headlands. But I try hard not to overdo it. In fact, I leave the painting a little underworked, letting the frame finish the painting. I hope you enjoyed seeing my process by which I go about doing a watercolor. Please be sure to check out my paintings and more of my work at the Maritime Gallery at Mystic Seaport. Thanks for watching.